Claire had always believed second chances were gifts, not guarantees. After years of raising her daughter alone, she had finally found love again with Richard. A quiet, thoughtful man who carried his own shadows. Their marriage, still fresh, was built on hope and the promise of blending two broken lives into one whole. Moving into Richard's house was supposed to be the start of something steady, something safe. But even in those early weeks, Claire could feel the cracks beneath the surface, hidden like hairline fractures in glass that only revealed themselves under pressure. Richard's teenage son, Ethan, was polite enough, always respectful, but distant in a way that stung. At 16, he seemed caught between boyhood and manhood, his eyes full of questions he never voiced. He greeted her with nods instead of smiles, short answers instead of conversation. Claire told herself it was normal, he had lost his mother. And now here she was, a stranger in his home, trying to share meals at his father's table. She couldn't expect warmth right away. Still, late at night, she sometimes wondered if he saw her as an intruder. The house itself was beautiful but carried a kind of silence that pressed down on her. Family pictures still lined the hallway, photos of Richard, Ethan, and the late wife whose absence seemed louder than any presence. Claire didn't want to erase the past. She only wanted to find a place within it. She cleaned. She cooked. She adjusted, hoping one day Ethan might see her not as a replacement, but as someone who cared. Richard, meanwhile, was buried in work. His job at the firm demanded long hours, leaving Claire and Ethan alone more often than she expected. Dinners sometimes passed with little more than clinking forks and the hum of the refrigerator filling the space between them. Claire tried to ask about school, about friends, about soccer, but Ethan's answers were clipped. "It's fine." "Yeah." "No." It wasn't defiance, just a wall she couldn't scale. One Friday evening, while Richard stayed late at the office, Claire found herself alone in the living room with a book she couldn't focus on. Upstairs, Ethan's door was closed, as always. She had noticed he spent more and more time in his room, but she told herself it was typical teenage behavior. Still, that night, the silence stretched oddly. Then she heard its soft rustling, a muffled thump, and the low scrape of a drawer sliding shut. It wasn't loud, but in the stillness of the house it carried. Claire froze, book slipping slightly in her lap. She wasn't the kind of person to snoop, but the sound stirred a prickle of unease. She told herself it could be homework, music, even him pacing around. Yet the noises didn't sound like any of those things. They sounded like secrecy. She waited, ears straining, then caught a faint whisper, almost like someone talking under their breath. Her chest tightened. She hesitated at the bottom of the stairs. It wasn't her place, she reminded herself. She wasn't his mother. If Ethan wanted privacy, he deserved it. But another thought crept in: what if something was wrong? What if he was in trouble? She climbed a few steps, each creak of the wood loud enough to make her want to retreat. She stopped outside his door, her hand hovering near the frame. A sharp sound came from inside, papers being shoved quickly, the scrape of a chair, then silence. Claire's breath caught. He was hiding something. She knocked lightly. "Ethan, you okay?" There was a pause, too long to be casual, before his voice came, steady but tense. "I'm fine." The answer should have reassured her, but it didn't. Something about the delay, the edge in his tone, made her pulse quicken. She turned to leave, then heard it again, a drawer sliding, fast this time, followed by the faint crinkle of paper. Instinct overrode hesitation. She pressed on the doorknob. The door wasn't locked. It swung open just enough for her to see Ethan jump, his shoulders stiff, eyes wide. He was sitting at his desk, a stack of papers in his hand, which he shoved clumsily into a box at his feet. The look on his face wasn't anger, it was fear, the kind that begged not to be exposed. Claire blinked, startled. "I didn't mean to," she started, but stopped herself. Her eyes flicked toward the box before Ethan scrambled to push it further under the desk. "Don't," he said quickly, his voice low, almost desperate. "Please, just don't." The room fell heavy with unspoken tension. Claire stood frozen in the doorway, torn between respect and concern. She hadn't seen enough to know what he was hiding, but she had seen enough to know it mattered. His hands trembled slightly, his jaw set tight as though bracing for judgment. Claire swallowed hard, searching his face. "Ethan, I'm not here to get you in trouble." He shook his head, avoiding her gaze, his dark hair falling over his forehead. "You don't understand. You can't tell Dad. Promise me." The plea caught her off guard. His voice cracked with urgency, not rebellion. For the first time, she felt something break through the wall between them. Not warmth, but raw vulnerability. He was carrying a secret, one heavy enough that he feared his own father knowing. Claire hesitated, torn between instincts. Richard deserved honesty, but Ethan deserved trust. In that moment, looking at his pale, frightened face, she couldn't bring herself to betray him. She nodded slowly. "Okay, I won't." Ethan's shoulders sagged in relief. He turned back to his desk, busying himself with a notebook as if the conversation hadn't happened. But Claire could feel the shift in the air. Something inside that box had changed everything she thought she knew about this quiet, closed-off boy Dot as she stepped back into the hallway. Her heart thudded. She had promised silence, but the question burned hotter than ever. What exactly had she caught him hiding? That night, as she lay awake beside Richard's empty side of the bed, Claire replayed the moment in her head. The way Ethan's eyes had widened, the urgency in his voice, the fear of being exposed. Whatever secret lived in that box wasn't small. It was big enough to change how they saw each other. And though she had promised to keep it quiet, Claire knew in her bones this was only the beginning. The promise Claire had made to Ethan weighed on her like an anchor. Every time she looked at him over the next few days, she couldn't shake the image of his hands shoving papers into that box. His eyes, wide and pleading, replayed in her mind each night as she lay awake. What could be so important, so dangerous in his eyes, that he'd beg her not to tell his father? The question gnawed at her, pulling her attention even when she tried to focus on other things. Richard remained oblivious. He was buried in deadlines, working late at the office and returning home with weary smiles and distracted conversation. When Claire hinted gently that Ethan seemed troubled, Richard brushed it off. "He's a teenager. That's how they are," he said with a shrug. But Claire couldn't accept that answer. This wasn't simple moodiness. This was fear. One afternoon, while Richard was still at work, Claire decided to tidy up. The sun was streaming in through the windows, filling the house with warmth, but her chest carried the chill of unease. As she dusted the hallway and straightened bookshelves, her steps slowed near Ethan's closed door. She wasn't snooping, she told herself, just checking in. Still, her pulse sped up as she gently pushed the door open. The room smelled faintly of cologne and pencil shavings. Posters lined the walls, a mix of old band prints and faded soccer banners. The desk was neat, the bed made halfway. Nothing looked suspicious, nothing out of place. But she knew what she was looking for. Her gaze fell on the desk chair, tucked in neatly. Beneath it, barely visible, was the box. She froze. She had promised him. The memory of his voice, "Promise me," echoed in her mind. She turned toward the hallway, ready to walk away, but something stopped her. The thought of Ethan carrying whatever weight was in that box alone felt unbearable. She didn't want to betray him, but she also didn't want to let him drown in silence. Her hands shook as she pulled the box out. It was heavier than she expected. Lifting the lid, she found not drugs or anything reckless as she had half feared, but stacks of envelopes, neatly tied together with a faded ribbon. Alongside them were a handful of photographs, their edges curled with age. Claire picked up one of the photos. It was Ethan as a child, no more than 5, sitting on a picnic blanket. Beside him was a woman with warm eyes and a gentle smile. Her arms wrapped around him, her face glowing with love. Claire's heart clenched. This had to be Ethan's mother. The next photo showed Ethan again, this time in the arms of an older couple who looked familiar though she couldn't place them. Their expressions were tender, full of pride. Grandparents, she realized. Ethan's maternal family. She pulled out one of the letters, her fingers trembling as she unfolded it. The handwriting was careful, almost elegant. Dear Ethan, we've missed you so much. Not a day goes by that we don't think of you. We wish we could see you, hear your voice, watch you grow. Please write back. Love always. Grandma and Grandpa. Claire blinked, her throat tightening. Letter after letter told the same story. Grandparents reaching out, trying to stay connected to the boy their daughter had left behind. Some letters carried birthday wishes, others gentle updates about family gatherings, always ending with love and longing. Her mind spun. Why hadn't Richard told her about this? Why had Ethan been left to hide them in secret? She imagined the boy, year after year, quietly receiving these reminders of a family he couldn't see. A family cut off from him. The weight of it must have been unbearable. As she held the letters, she heard footsteps. Panic shot through her. She shoved the papers back into the box, fumbling to arrange them as they had been. Ethan appeared in the doorway, his face paling instantly when he saw what she was holding. You promised, he whispered, his voice raw with betrayal. Claire's heart dropped. Ethan, I'm sorry, I wasn't trying to. You promised. His voice rose, louder this time, his eyes glassy with unshed tears. He stepped forward, snatching the box from her hands, clutching it to his chest like a shield. His whole body trembled, as though he had been stripped bare. Claire reached out, but he flinched back. Ethan, please. I didn't mean to break your trust. I needed to understand. These letters, they're from your grandparents, aren't they? His jaw tightened. He wouldn't look at her. You weren't supposed to see them. The silence stretched between them, sharp and heavy. Claire wanted to comfort him, to explain that she wasn't angry, only concerned, but the look in his eyes cut her. He didn't see her as an ally in that moment. He saw her as one more person ready to take his secrets away. She softened her tone. Ethan, they love you. They've been reaching out for years. Why didn't your dad ever tell you? That broke through his silence. His lips pressed together, his shoulders shaking. Finally, he whispered. Because he doesn't want me to know them. He doesn't want me to have them. The words hit her like a blow. Richard? Hiding Ethan's family from him. She couldn't make sense of it. Richard had always been loving, protective, maybe even overprotective, but to cut his son off from his grandparents, from his mother's family. Ethan's voice cracked as he went on. I found the letters a year ago. He kept them in his study. I don't know how many he threw away before then. I couldn't tell him I knew. So I kept them. His grip on the box tightened. They're all I have of her. They're the only people who talk about her. Claire's chest ached. In that moment, she saw not a guarded teenager but a boy carrying a grief far bigger than himself. She wanted to reach for him, to promise him she'd make it right, but the raw pain in his face warned her to move carefully. I'm not going to tell your dad, she said softly. But Ethan, You can't carry this alone forever. Secrets like this, they tear you apart. He finally looked at her, his eyes red, a mixture of anger, fear, and something else, hope, fragile and uncertain. Then help me, he whispered. Claire drew in a shaky breath. That simple plea pierced her. She nodded slowly. I'll help you. But deep inside she knew what that meant. To help Ethan, she would have to go against Richard. And once the truth came out, nothing in their lives would ever be the same again. The promise weighed on Claire heavier than she could have imagined. Every morning when she walked into the kitchen and saw Ethan hunched over his cereal, she felt the tension in her chest. He kept his eyes down, barely speaking, as though afraid that even casual words might break the fragile pact between them. When Richard joined them at the table, sipping coffee and flipping through emails on his phone, the silence was unbearable. Claire wanted to scream, to blurt out everything, but Ethan's desperate eyes from that night stopped her. Richard trusted her. He often told her she was the glue holding their new family together. If he knew she was keeping something from him, that trust would shatter. But how could she betray Ethan after hearing the longing in his voice? He wasn't hiding something shameful, he was holding on to love. That difference made all the weight land squarely on her. During the day, Claire moved through chores with restless energy. Folding laundry, she found herself staring at Richard's shirts, wondering if the man she had married was capable of keeping such a cruel secret from his own son. Dusting shelves, she paused at the photo of Richard and Ethan taken years ago, both smiling at a baseball game. Was that smile real? Or had Richard already begun building walls of silence by then? Ethan avoided her gaze whenever they crossed paths, but she noticed small changes. He no longer slammed his door when she walked by. He lingered for a few seconds at the dinner table after Richard left for work calls. His guarded distance was softening, replaced by something almost like trust. Claire felt the shift and clung to it, even though guilt twisted inside her. One night, while Richard was stuck late at the office again, Claire was curled up on the couch with a blanket when Ethan appeared at the doorway. He hesitated, then sat down across from her. For the first time since she'd entered his life, he looked like he wanted to speak. They write every month, he said quietly, staring at his hands. Sometimes twice. Birthdays, holidays. They never stop. Claire set the blanket aside, giving him her full attention. That must mean they love you very much. He gave a short, bitter laugh. Or they don't know when to quit. But she saw the flicker of hope in his eyes, the part of him that wanted to believe in their persistence. She leaned forward gently. Do you want to see them? His throat worked as he swallowed. I don't even know them. Not really. But they knew her. They could tell me things about her. Dad won't. He hardly says her name. His voice cracked. I don't want to forget her. Claire's heart twisted. She reached across the coffee table, placing her hand over his. He didn't pull away. You're not going to forget her. But maybe it's okay to want more than just memories. Maybe it's okay to want family. His eyes shimmered, and he gave the smallest nod. It was all she needed to know. But later, when Richard came home and kissed her on the cheek, thanking her for reheating his dinner, the guilt surged again. How could she smile at him, knowing she was holding back something this important? And yet, telling him would mean betraying Ethan. She felt trapped in a maze with no way out. The following weekend, Richard suggested a family outing to the park. He wanted to show he was trying, and Claire appreciated the effort. Ethan went along quietly, hands shoved in his pockets. They ate sandwiches on a bench, watched dogs chase frisbees, and made small talk. But Claire couldn't stop watching Richard. The way he avoided mentioning Ethan's mother, the way he seemed content to leave the past sealed, told her more than words could. He wasn't just forgetting, he was hiding. That night, as she cleared dishes. Claire's eyes landed on Richard's study door. She had never gone in without him, respecting it as his private space. But now she wondered, were there more letters hidden there? More secrets Ethan hadn't found? The thought of digging through Richard's desk felt wrong, but the temptation gnawed at her. She didn't act on it. Instead, she lay in bed beside him, staring at the ceiling long after he fell asleep. Ethan's voice echoed in her mind. Then help me, she had promised. But helping him meant carrying a secret that could destroy her marriage. Days stretched into weeks, and the tension deepened. Richard started noticing her distraction. "You've been quiet," he said one evening as they cooked dinner together. "Everything okay?" Claire forced a smile. "Just tired," but he studied her with suspicion, as though sensing an undercurrent he couldn't name. She quickly changed the subject, but his frown lingered. The next afternoon, Claire found Ethan sitting at the kitchen table with the box open. Letters spread across the surface like fallen leaves. He looked up at her, his expression unreadable. "I thought about writing back," he admitted, his voice steady. "But I don't even know what I'd say." Claire sat down beside him. "You could start with hello." He let out a shaky laugh, half relief, half fear. "If Dad finds out, he'll never forgive me." Claire squeezed his shoulder. "We'll figure it out together." For the first time, Ethan looked at her not as a stranger, not as the woman who had replaced his mother, but as someone standing beside him. The connection warmed her, but it also terrified her, because she knew the truth Richard would eventually find out. Secrets had a way of surfacing, no matter how deep you tried to bury them. That night, Claire tucked herself into bed with a pit in her stomach. She had made her choice to stand by Ethan, but it meant lying to her husband. She wasn't sure how long she could keep it up. The next morning, as she poured coffee, Richard came into the kitchen and kissed her cheek. "You know I love you, right?" he murmured. The words nearly broke her. She smiled weakly, but inside she felt torn apart. She loved him, but she was standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing that one step, one slip, could send their fragile family tumbling. And then, as she turned to wash the mug, she saw Ethan standing in the doorway, watching them with a look that was part longing, part dread. She knew in that moment the secret could not stay hidden forever. The morning began like any other, but Claire's chest carried a weight that would not lift. Richard rushed out the door with a distracted goodbye, leaving her alone in the house. Ethan had already gone to school, his backpack slung over one shoulder, his face as guarded as always. Claire cleaned the kitchen, folded laundry, but her mind kept circling back to the box of letters. She couldn't stop wondering how many more secrets were hidden beyond what Ethan had found. Richard's study door stood closed, as it always did when he wasn't home. She lingered in the hallway, hands trembling at her sides. She didn't want to betray her husband. She didn't want to become the kind of woman who searched through someone's private things. But hadn't he already betrayed Ethan? Hadn't he betrayed the memory of the woman he once loved by cutting her family out of their son's life? The tension inside the house was thick, almost unbearable. For days after Claire discovered the letters in Richard's drawer, she walked on eggshells. Ethan avoided his father more than usual, slipping away to his room, eating quickly, barely speaking. Richard noticed the silence but brushed it off, too caught up in his own routine to see the storm brewing. Claire, however, felt it pressing closer with every passing hour. It happened one evening, sudden and sharp, like a crack splitting a wall that had been holding too much weight. Dinner had been quiet again. Richard tried to talk about work, but his words fell into the air, like stones sinking in water. Ethan pushed his food around his plate until finally, he dropped his fork with a clatter. The sound made both Claire and Richard look up. "I can't do this anymore," Ethan said, his voice trembling but strong enough to carry across the table. Richard frowned. Do what? This, Ethan shot back, gesturing between them. Pretend everything's normal. Pretend you didn't take away half of who I am. Richard stiffened. What's your tone, Ethan? What are you talking about? Claire's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to reach across the table, to stop Ethan before the words spilled out, but she knew it was too late. He was past the point of holding it in. The letters, Ethan said, his voice breaking. From Mom's family. I know about them. I found them. And then Claire found them too, in your study. You hid them from me. You hid them from everyone. The silence that followed was suffocating. Richard's face went pale, then flushed red, his hands tightening into fists against the table. Claire braced herself, but Ethan pressed on, the words tumbling out like water from a broken dam. They wrote to you for years. They begged you to let me know them. And you just threw it all away, like they didn't matter, like she didn't matter. Do you know what that feels like? To know that people out there love me, miss me, and I've been kept from them because of you. Richard slammed his palm against the table, the dishes rattling. Enough. You don't understand what you're talking about. I understand perfectly. Ethan's eyes blazed with tears now. You were scared. You thought they'd take me away from you. So instead of trusting me, instead of letting me choose, you decided for me. You decided I didn't need them. You decided I didn't need her memory. The rawness in Ethan's voice cut through the room like a knife. Claire's eyes burned as she watched father and son facing each other, both trembling, both wounded. She had never seen Ethan so vulnerable, and she had never seen Richard so cornered. Richard's chest rose and fell quickly. You think it was easy for me? Do you think I enjoyed reading those letters? Every word was like ripping open a wound I'd spent years trying to heal. I lost her too, Ethan. She was my wife before she was your mother. And when she died, I promised myself I would do whatever it took to keep you safe. Safe from what? Ethan demanded. From love. From family? From the people who could have told me about her. You didn't protect me, you erased her. Richard's face crumpled, just for a second, before he forced it back into stone. I did what I thought was right. You were just a boy. You needed stability, not reminders of what we lost. You mean what you lost? Ethan whispered, his voice shaking. Because you couldn't handle it, I had to grow up not knowing the other half of me. Do you know how lonely that feels? To look in the mirror and not know where I came from. To have questions that you'll never answer because you don't want to. Richard's hand twitched, like he wanted to reach for him. But Ethan pulled back before the gesture could form. The distance between them stretched wider, deeper. Claire finally spoke. Her voice soft but steady. Richard, he's right. I've read those letters. They weren't trying to take him away from you. They were trying to be part of his life. And keeping them hidden, keeping them both in the dark, it didn't protect anyone. It just hurt him. Richard turned to her, his eyes full of betrayal. You went through my things? I didn't mean to, she admitted. But once I saw the truth, I couldn't unsee it. And neither can Ethan. You can't hide this anymore. You have to face it. Ethan stood suddenly, his chair scraping back. I don't care what excuses you give. I'm done pretending. If you won't let me reach out to them, then I'll do it myself. I'll find them. I'll write to them. I'll tell them I exist. And you can't stop me anymore. Richard's face hardened, but his voice cracked when he spoke. If you walk down that road, Ethan, everything will change. You don't know what you're inviting into your life. Ethan shook his head, tears finally spilling over. Everything already changed the day you decided to hide her from me. He stormed out of the dining room, his footsteps pounding up the stairs. the slam of his door echoing through the house like a final note in a painful song. Claire sat frozen, her chest aching, her hands clenched in her lap. Richard stayed at the table, staring at the empty space where his son had just been, his eyes dark with a mix of anger and grief. For the first time, Claire saw not just the man she married, but the man who had never learned how to let go of his pain. The silence that followed was heavier than anything before. It was the silence of truth laid bare, of wounds reopened. And in that silence, Claire knew nothing would ever be the same again. The night after the confrontation, the house was heavy with silence. Claire barely slept. She lay awake, listening to the faint creaks of the old home, her mind circling around Ethan's words, Richard's anger, and the wall that now stood between father and son. When morning came, the tension was visible in the smallest things, the way Richard avoided eye contact at the breakfast table, the way Ethan slipped out the door without saying goodbye. Claire stayed behind after Richard left for work, sitting at the table with her coffee untouched. She couldn't stop thinking about Ethan's final words. "I'll find them. I'll write to them. I'll tell them I exist." She knew he meant it, and she also knew Richard would never allow it. That meant Ethan would have to do it in secret. Her heart ached at the thought. Secrets had already caused enough damage in this house. But what choice did Ethan have? Claire only hoped he would trust her enough to let her help him. That afternoon, she knocked softly on his bedroom door. No answer. She pushed it open anyway, and found him hunched over his desk, scribbling into a notebook. His shoulders tensed when he heard her enter. "I'm not here to stop you," Claire said gently, stepping inside. "I just want to know what you're planning." Ethan turned, his eyes wary but tired. The fight from the night before had drained him, leaving only sadness in its place. "I found an address," he admitted quietly, "on one of the letters. It's from my grandma, I think. I want to write back. I need to." Claire's throat tightened. She nodded slowly. "Do you want me to look over it before you send it?" His eyes softened just a little. "You'd do that? I'd do anything to help you feel less alone," she said. For the first time in days, he gave her a small, fragile smile. He slid the notebook toward her, and Claire sat down beside him. His words were raw, unpolished, but full of longing. He introduced himself, explained that he had found their letters, and admitted he wanted to know more about his mother. He asked if they still thought of him, if they wanted him in their lives. Claire read the page with tears welling in her eyes. "It's beautiful, Ethan. It's honest. That's all they'll need to hear." They worked together to copy the letter neatly, fold it, and seal it in an envelope. Ethan stared at it for a long time, as though holding the weight of his own heart in his hands. "What if they don't answer?" he whispered. "They will," Claire said firmly, though deep down she shared his fear. "And if they don't, it won't be because they don't care. It'll be because they're as scared as your dad. But you're brave enough to take the first step." The next day after school, Ethan mailed the letter while Claire stood quietly at his side. The envelope slid into the mailbox with a soft clink, and when it was gone, Ethan let out a shaky breath, as if he'd been holding it for years. But the secret weighed on them both. Richard carried on as usual, unaware of what his son had done. He spoke about meetings, bills, and weekend plans, his words filling the silence but never touching the truth. Claire found herself caught in the middle, lying by omission every time Richard asked if everything was settling down. She wanted to tell him, to beg him to listen, but every time she imagined it, she saw the look on Ethan's face, a look of betrayal if she broke his trust. A week passed. Then 2. Ethan grew restless, checking the mailbox every afternoon. Some days, when no reply came, he looked crushed, his hope fading by degrees. Claire tried to reassure him, telling him letters could take time, that maybe his grandmother needed space to find the words. But doubt began to creep into both of their hearts. Then, one Friday afternoon, Claire found Ethan standing at the mailbox with a trembling hand. In it was an envelope with handwriting she recognized. Instantly, the same looping script from the hidden letters in Richard's drawer. Ethan looked at her with wide eyes. "It's from them." They rushed inside, closing the door behind them as though hiding something fragile. Ethan tore the envelope open, his hands shaking. Inside was a letter several pages long. Claire watched his face as he read, saw his lips part, his eyes glisten, his breath hitch. Finally, he handed it to her, too overwhelmed to speak. She unfolded it carefully and began to read. The letter was full of love. His grandmother wrote that not a day had gone by without them thinking of him. She described his mother's laugh, the way she used to sing in the kitchen, the stubborn tilt of her chin that she said Ethan had inherited. She told him about holidays they had imagined sharing with him, birthdays they had celebrated in his absence, prayers they had whispered that one day he would find them. And she ended with an invitation. "Please, if you want to, come visit us. Our door is open always." Claire pressed the letter to her chest, her eyes brimming. Ethan sat silently, staring at the floor, the words sinking into him like sunlight after years of darkness. "They want me," he whispered. "They still want me." Claire reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly. "Of course they do." But joy was mixed with fear. What would Richard say if he found out? Claire could already imagine his fury, his sense of betrayal. And yet, as she looked at Ethan, she knew the truth. This was something bigger than Richard's fear. This was about Ethan finally finding the missing piece of himself. That night, Claire hid the letter in her drawer, so Richard wouldn't find it. She promised Ethan she would help him figure out the next step. For the first time in years, Ethan slept peacefully, clutching the knowledge that he wasn't forgotten. But Claire lay awake, her heart torn. The secret between her and Ethan was growing heavier by the day. The truth was coming closer, and when it finally broke into the open, she feared it would tear the family apart. And still, one thought echoed in her mind as she drifted toward restless sleep. Richard cannot be kept in the dark forever. The days after the reply arrived carried a different kind of energy. Ethan walked lighter, his eyes brighter, his silence softer. For so long, he had been weighed down by questions, and now, even though the road ahead was uncertain, he finally had an answer. His mother's family wanted him. Claire noticed the change immediately. She would catch him staring out the window, smiling faintly to himself, or scribbling in his notebook late into the night. But change never goes unnoticed for long. Richard, distracted as he often was, began to pick up on the subtle shifts in his son's behavior. One evening, as they sat at the dinner table, Richard looked up from his plate and narrowed his eyes at Ethan. "You seem different," he said slowly. "What's going on with you?" Ethan froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. Claire's heart skipped a beat. She quickly jumped in. "He's just doing better in school. I think the tension has been easing a little." Richard looked unconvinced. "Better in school?" He studied Ethan for a moment longer, but let it drop. Still, the suspicion lingered in his gaze. Later that night, after Richard had gone to bed, Ethan slipped into the living room where Claire sat pretending to read. "He knows something," Ethan whispered, panic flickering in his eyes. "He doesn't know," Claire reassured him, closing the book. "But you need to be careful. If he finds out about the letter before you're ready, it could make things worse." Ethan nodded but looked unconvinced. The secret had given him hope. But it also carried fear that the fragile bridge he had built with his mother's family could collapse if Richard discovered it too soon. A week passed. Another letter arrived. Then another. Each one brought stories of his mother, her favorite books, her stubborn streak as a child, the way she loved fiercely and without hesitation. Ethan soaked up every word like a man starved, and Claire often found herself weeping quietly after reading them. The letters were not just paper and ink. They were lifelines, stitching together pieces of Ethan's heart that had been torn for years. But secrets have a way of unraveling. One Saturday morning, Richard was searching for a pair of socks in Claire's dresser while she was in the shower. His hand brushed against an envelope tucked beneath folded sweaters. Curious, he pulled it out. The handwriting stopped him cold. He knew it instantly, the same loops and curves he had locked away in his drawer for years. He tore it open, his chest tightening as he read. The words swam before his eyes, each sentence burning like fire. His son had written to them. They had replied. They were talking behind his back, and Claire had known. When Claire stepped out of the bathroom moments later, she found Richard sitting on the edge of the bed, the letter crushed in his fist. His face was unreadable, but his eyes blazed with betrayal. "You knew," he said flatly. Claire's heart dropped. She reached for the letter, but he pulled it away. "Richard, you knew he was doing this," he snapped, his voice low and sharp. "And you hid it from me." She took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. "I didn't hide it to hurt you. I was protecting Ethan. He needed this, Richard. He needed them." Richard stood abruptly, pacing the room. "Protecting him? From what? From me? I'm his father. I've given him everything. And this is how you both repay me? Secrets and lies?" Claire's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't back down. "You gave him everything but the truth. You kept a part of him locked away, because you couldn't face your own pain. This isn't about repayment, Richard. This is about a boy who deserves to know he is." The bedroom door creaked open then, and Ethan stood there, pale and wide-eyed. He had heard every word. "You found it," he whispered. Richard turned to him, his face a storm. "How could you go behind my back like this?" Ethan's voice shook, but he held his ground. "Because you never gave me a choice. You decided for me. All these years. I had to take back what you stole." Richard's jaw tightened. "I didn't steal anything. I kept you safe." "Safe from what?" Ethan shouted, his voice cracking. "From knowing that my mom loved me? From her family who wanted me? That's not safety, that's a prison." The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Richard looked like he had been struck. His lips parted, but no sound came out. For the first time, Ethan wasn't just angry, he was standing tall, refusing to be silenced. Claire stepped between them, her voice steady but pleading. "This isn't about winning an argument. This is about healing. Richard, can't you see? He's not a little boy anymore. He doesn't need you to shield him. He needs you to trust him." Richard's eyes flickered between his wife and his son, torn between pride and fear. Finally, his shoulders slumped, but his voice was still laced with pain. "And what happens when they take him from me? When he chooses them over me?" Ethan's expression softened, though tears streamed down his cheeks. "I don't want to choose between you. I just want to know both sides of me. Why can't you let me have that?" The room went quiet, the air heavy with unspoken words. Richard sank onto the bed, covering his face with his hands. Claire touched Ethan's arm, guiding him gently out of the room to give Richard space. In the hallway, Ethan leaned against the wall, his chest heaving. "He'll never forgive me," he whispered. Claire shook her head, brushing his hair back gently. "He will, but forgiveness takes time. You've both been carrying so much pain. Now it's finally in the open. That's the first step. Down the hall, Richard sat alone, the letter still in his hand. For years he had built walls to protect himself from grief, but now those walls were crumbling. His son's voice, filled with longing and hurt, echoed in his ears. For the first time, he wondered if keeping Ethan away from the past had been less about protection and more about his own fear of being left behind. The truth was out, the secret no longer hidden. And though it had torn them apart in the moment, Claire knew it had also created a chance to finally face the past together, instead of alone. But the hardest choice still lay ahead. Would Richard let go of his fear and open the door to Ethan's family? Or would he cling to the silence that had already cost them so much? The house felt like it was holding its breath. After Richard discovered the letters, silence filled every corner. Meals were eaten quickly, words clipped and shallow, footsteps heavy on the floorboards. Ethan stayed in his room most nights, reading the replies from his grandmother and clinging to the connection he had finally found. Richard avoided looking at him, as if eye contact might reopen the wound. And Claire moved between them, her heart aching, desperate to hold the pieces together. That tension like that cannot last forever. It either breaks apart or finds release. The moment came one Sunday afternoon, when Claire gathered her courage and asked Richard to sit down in the living room. She had rehearsed the words for days, but her voice still trembled as she spoke. "Richard, we can't go on like this," she began. "We're living in silence, and it's tearing this family apart. We have to face what's happening." Richard sat stiffly on the couch, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles whitened. "Face what? That my own son doesn't trust me. That my wife hid things from me." Ethan appeared in the doorway then, his expression hesitant but determined. "That's not what this is about," he said quietly. "It's about Mom. About her family. About me." The air in the room thickened. Richard looked up at him, his eyes raw with unspoken fear. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Ethan stepped closer, holding one of the letters in his hand. "They wrote to me again," he said, his voice steady. "They want me to visit. They want to meet me, and I want to meet them." Richard's breath caught. He shook his head slowly, as though refusing to hear. "Ethan, you don't understand. Once you open that door, you can't close it. They'll want more. They'll pull you into their world, and his voice cracked, "I'll lose you." Ethan's eyes filled with tears, but he didn't back down. "You won't lose me. You're my dad. Nothing changes that. But I can't keep pretending half of me doesn't exist. I need this, Dad. I need to know them. I need to know her." Claire reached for Richard's hand, her own eyes glistening. "He's not asking to leave you. He's asking you to let him be whole. Don't you see? The more you fight it, the more you push him away. But if you stand with him, you won't lose him, you'll grow closer." Richard's face twisted with conflict. For years, he had carried the weight of grief alone, burying it beneath routine and silence. He had convinced himself that shutting out the past was the only way to survive. But now, as he looked at his son, he realized the truth. In trying to protect Ethan from pain, he had created a different kind of wound, one that only honesty and courage could heal. Finally, his shoulders slumped. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." "You are," Claire said firmly. "And you don't have to do it alone." Ethan stepped forward, his voice trembling but full of hope. "Come with me. Meet them with me. Please, Dad, don't let me do this without you." The room fell silent again. Richard's eyes glistened, his chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. Then slowly he nodded. It was small, almost uncertain, but it was a beginning. The following week was a blur of nerves and anticipation. Ethan wrote back to his grandmother, telling her he wanted to visit, and that his dad might come too. The reply came quickly, an open invitation, full of joy and relief. Claire drove the three of them on a crisp Saturday morning, the car quiet except for the hum of the road. Ethan stared out the window, his hands clenched tightly in his lap. Richard sat rigid in the passenger seat, his gaze fixed straight ahead. When they arrived, Ethan's grandmother was waiting on the porch of a small white house with a faded blue door. Her hands trembled as she stepped forward, her eyes brimming with tears. The moment she saw Ethan, her face broke into a sob, and she pulled him into her arms. "My boy," she whispered, holding him as though afraid to let go. "You're here. You're really here." Ethan clung to her, his own tears spilling freely. For the first time in years, he felt a piece of himself slot into place, a gap in his heart filled with warmth and belonging. Claire wiped her eyes, watching as Ethan's grandmother smoothed his hair and whispered stories about his mother, about the way she used to laugh, the way she used to dream. Then she looked up, her gaze landing on Richard. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The years of silence, the anger, the grief hung heavy between them. Finally, Richard stepped forward. His voice was rough but sincere. "I should have brought him sooner. I thought I was protecting him. I was wrong." Ethan's grandmother's eyes softened, though pain lingered there. "You were hurting. We all were. But he's here now. That's what matters." The day passed in a blur of stories, photographs, and hesitant laughter. Ethan sat surrounded by people who knew his mother, soaking in every detail: how she loved to paint, how she used to hum while cooking, how fiercely she loved him even in the short time she had. Richard stayed quiet, but he listened, the walls he had built slowly crumbling. Claire watched it all with a heart full of relief. As the sun dipped low, Ethan walked into the backyard with his father. They stood side by side, watching the sky turn orange and pink. "Thank you," Ethan said softly. Richard looked at him, his eyes weary but gentle. "For what?" "For coming. For trying." Richard swallowed hard. "I can't promise this will be easy, but I'll try. I don't want to lose you, Ethan." "You won't," Ethan whispered. "Not if we do this together." For the first time in years, Richard reached out and pulled his son into a hug. It was awkward, rough, but it was real. Claire watched from the porch, her eyes brimming, knowing this was not the end of their struggles, but it was the start of healing. That night, as they drove home under the quiet hum of the stars, the silence in the car was different. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was full, alive, waiting. The truth had finally come into the light, and though their lives had changed forever, they had changed in a way that promised hope. The door had been opened, and for the first time, no one wanted to close it again.